Hello, everyone. All right, are you ready to see how how the book ends? So we're on chapter 15, Christmas Magic. They had just got back to the castle with the cup, and then right as they were about to take some of the water and put it on all of their frozen, the king and the queen and Morgan and all the knights, Jack tripped in the water. Jack tripped and the silver cup slipped from his hand. So it says chapter 15. Jack and Annie watched in horror as the water from the cup splashed all over the stone floor. It trickled into the cracks between the stones and it disappeared. Jack scrambled to the cup. He picked it up, but it was completely empty. Oh no, Jack moaned. He sat back and put his head in his hands. Camelot will never wake up now. The legend will end forever. Jack, said Annie. Look. Jack raised his head. He pushed his glasses into place, and a golden cloud was rising from the cracks between all the stones in the floor. The cloud spread quickly throughout the great hall, filling the room with wonderful smells, the scent of cedar smoke and evergreen, of roses and almonds. The cloud rose up and then wafted out through the upper windows of the hall. Suddenly, a white dove flew through one of the windows. It soared across the dark room like a bright light, then swooped back out into the night. Soft, gentle laughter came from the end of the hall. The laughter grew louder. Jack saw King Arthur and Queen Guinevere looking at one another, and they were laughing. The knights of the Round Table were laughing too. Best of all, Jack saw Morgan Le Fay smiling at him and Annie. Jack, Annie, come here, she called, and she held out her hands. Morgan, cried Annie. She ran to Morgan and threw up her arms around the enchantress. Jack stood up. Still holding the empty cup, he ran to Morgan and hugged her too. We did what the Christmas night told us to do, said Annie. We brought back the water of memory and imagination. But I dropped the cup and I spilled the water, said Jack. But the water made a gold cloud, said Annie, and everyone came back to life. Morgan laughed with amazement. You have just returned from the other world, she asked. Yes, said Annie. A white stag brought us back, said Jack. He turned to King Arthur. Your Majesty, we have good news. Your knights are safe. Sir Lancelot said to tell you they'll be home before the first night of the new year. The king looked bewildered. You found them? Yes, and they're all fine, said Annie. Here, said Jack. He handed the silver cup to the king. Please give this back to Sir Galahad. Anne, please give this to Sir Lancelot, said Annie. She took the glass key from around her neck and gave it to King Arthur. Oh, and give this to Sir Percival, said Jack. He pulled out the wooden compass box from his backpack and gave it to the king. At first, King Arthur was too stunned to speak. Then he clapped his hands and laughed joyfully. Thank you, he said to Jack and Annie. The knights of the Round Table all cheered. Ring the bells, King Arthur shouted. Call the people of Camelot to the castle. They've already gathered outside the doors, your majesty. We'll bring them all in. We must all rejoice together. Queen Guinevere smiled at Jack and Annie. Her eyes sparkled now. Once again, you have helped save Camelot. Thank you very much. You're welcome, said Jack and Annie together. Then Jack heard the sounds of children talking and laughing. He turned to see a crowd of people streaming through the arched doorway of the great hall. They carried candles, a giant fir tree, and boughs of holly and pine. Musicians followed them with stringed instruments. As everyone started to decorate the hall, the musicians began playing and singing a beautiful Christmas carol. Jack, said Annie, look. The white stag was standing in the arched doorway. Jack turned excitedly to Morgan. Do you see that white stag, he said. That took us to the other world. Do you see him? Morgan smiled. Yes, I do see him. And now I see everything. Jack looked back at the doorway. The stag was gone. And in the stag's place stood an old man with a long white beard. He held a staff and wore a flowing red cloak, the same cloak Jack and Annie had worn on their quest. So look here in the castle. So it looks like the white stag turned into this old man. Who could that be? Who is that? Jack asked. That is Merlin, the magician, said Morgan. It was Merlin who invited you here. I can see that now. Merlin, said Jack. He sent us the royal invitation? Yes, said Morgan. Then he put the rest of us under a spell Annie carried you to the other world. No, said Annie, the Christmas night put you under a spell. And the white stag carried us to the other world. But Morgan smiled. Merlin was both the Christmas night and the white stag. Remember, he's a magician, not a mortal. He can change his shape whenever he wishes. Oh, wow, whispered Annie. Why did Merlin do these things? Said Jack. Merlin was angry when King Arthur banished magic from Camelot, said Morgan. I see now he finally took matters into his own hands. How? He knew King Arthur would not send more knights to the other world for the water of memory and imagination. So I assumed that he brought you to Camelot hoping that you would offer to go instead. But why did he want us to go? Asked Annie. Merlin has often heard my tales of your adventures in the treehouse, said Morgan. He knows you both have a great desire to fight for the good, and he knows that you use the gift of imagination very well. Those are two special qualities indeed to succeed in any quest. Jack and Annie looked back at Merlin. From far across the room, the white-bearded magician smiled at them. He raised his staff, then he slipped out the door. Jack looked all around the great hall. All the candles and torches were lit now. A fire blazed in the earth, and the musicians were playing. Everyone was singing. The room glowed with warm firelight and rosy faces. At last, Christmas in Camelot was just as Jack had imagined it would be. The spell of the dark wizard had been broken. The great hall was filled with beauty and love and joy and light. And that takes us to chapter 16 called Welcome Home. Yay! Jack and Annie did it. I was so worried when they spilled the water they weren't going to be able to save everyone, but thank goodness that golden cloud appeared. So chapter 16, Welcome Home. Wake up, Jack, said Annie. Jack opened his eyes. He was lying in the dark on the wooden floor of the treehouse. Through the window, he saw the cloudy sky above the Frog Creek woods. It's time to go home, said Annie. Oh, I must have fallen asleep, said Jack. I had the most incredible dream. I dreamed that we went to Camelot and it was Christmas and Merlin. That wasn't a dream, said Annie. It was real. You fell asleep at the round table during the party, and King Arthur carried you to the treehouse, and I made a wish for us to come home. Jack sat up. Seriously, he whispered. Yeah, seriously, she said. Jack, Annie, their mom called in the distance. Coming, Annie shouted out the treehouse window. She turned to Jack. Let's go. I mean, seriously, that really happened? Jack said, asked Annie again. Yes, really, she said. She held up the royal invitation. See? Here's proof. Oh, yeah, he whispered. This time, the letter M on the invitation stood for Merlin, not Morgan, said Annie. Jack smiled. Thanks, Merlin, he said softly. Jack picked up his backpack, then him and Annie started down the rope ladder and headed home. As they walked through the deep December twilight, snowflakes started to fall. By the time they left the woods and headed down their street, snow was swirling everywhere. Ahead they could see their house glowing with lamplight. Their mom was waiting on the front porch. Hi, Mom, said Annie. Hi, Mom, said Jack. Hi, kids, did you have a good day? Yeah, said Jack, pretty good. Oh, I'm so glad, said their mom. Welcome home. She held the door open and Jack and Annie slipped inside. Their house felt extra warm and cozy. Good smells came from the kitchen. Jack and Annie took off their snow-covered jackets, then they headed up the stairs. In the hallway, Annie turned to Jack. Merry Christmas, she said simply. Merry Christmas, he said. Annie slipped into her room and Jack into his. Jack closed his door and sat on his bed. He took his notebook out of his backpack and opened it. His spirits sank. Except for the 3 rhymes, he had taken no notes on this journey, not even one. Exhausted, Jack lay back in his bed. He squeezed his eyes shut. He tried to remember the details of their adventures in Camelot and the other world. He could feel the terrible chill in the great hall when Morgan was frozen. He could hear the joyful music as the winged dancers danced around in their circle. He could taste the sweet, bitter, spicy taste of the water of memory and imagination. Jack sat up. All at once, he felt very awake. So he turned to a clean pages in his notebook and he grabbed his pencil and he wrote, It all started when we saw the white dove in the twilight. Using his memory and imagination, Jack kept writing, doing his part to keep the legend of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, and Morgan Le Fay alive. As the snow swirled outside his window, Jack wrote and wrote and wrote. He didn't stop writing until he had written down his whole story. His story of Christmas in Camelot. And there's a picture of Jack working while it's snowing outside, writing and writing. And that's the end. Awesome job. So that's the end of book number 29. I hope you enjoyed it. This, I think, is my favorite book so far. It had a lot more adventures happening that Jack and Annie had to do. So I hope you enjoyed it too. All right, friends, I love you. I'll talk to you later. Bye.